So Pokemon remakes have been a staple of the Pokemon franchise for the last 20 years, with Pokemon FireRed and LeafGreen being our introduction to the Pokemon remake phenomena, and I'd say for the most part that Pokemon remakes are well received by the fans. No, not yet, we'll get to you later. Back in the bag, Nebby. So what if I told you that the Pokemon remake is officially dead and that it may not be exactly for the reasons you think it is? But before we really start discussing the ad mortem of the Pokemon remake, we're going to have to take a short trip down memory lane to remember the remakes we've had along the way. Kicking off with FireRed and LeafGreen in 2004, these games are remakes of the original Pokemon Red and Green games that were released for the Game Boy in 1996. Now, if you're one of the 7,975,000,000 people in the world, you'll probably remember these games as Pokemon Red and Blue instead, and that's because Pokemon Green was only released in Japan, with GameFreak changing the name from Green to Blue for Western audiences, apparently to appeal to Americans by referencing the colors of the American flag. Hashtag freedom! Now, a lot had changed for Pokemon games between Generation 1 to Generation 3, so these first remakes of Red and Green received massive overhauls, the most blatantly obvious one being the graphics. Now, if you ever played Pokemon's Red, Blue, or Green, you would know that the Pokemon sprites were, still a work in progress, you could say. The art of Red, Blue, Green went from questionably AI knockoff Pokemons to the staple designs we all know and love, or hate, depending who you ask. Aside from the obvious graphical upgrades, other major changes made in FireRed and LeafGreen include the addition of the Dark and Steel types, Nature's abilities, many new attacks introduced in Gens 2 and 3, and an expanded post-game plot that allows you to catch Pokemon from Kanto's sister region of Johto. And till this day, FireRed and LeafGreen remain the definitive best way to play through the Kanto region. No, we'll get to you in a moment. Back. Now, after FireRed and LeafGreen came Pokemon HeartGold and SoulSilver, the Generation 4 remakes of Generation 2's Gold and Silver. Now, I'm going to admit my biases here. Gold and Silver were two of my favorite Pokemon games growing up, and piggybacking off of that, so are Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, so it's safe to say that I was eating real good in Gen 4. However, objectively speaking, the original Gold and Silver games are considered to be some of the worst balanced Pokemon games in the franchise, mainly due to the nonsensical levels of gym leaders. For example, Jasmine, the 6th gym leader, has Pokemon whose levels are all higher than Price, who is the 7th gym leader. Then you have the post-game content, which has you take on all 8 of the Kanto gym leaders, and again, you have incongruent levels across the board here. Not to mention that by the time you reach the post-game content, your Pokemon should be well into their 50s, yet all of the Kanto gym leaders except for Blue and Blaine's single Rapidash are between the levels of 36 and 49. Like, who balanced this? I just want to talk to them. I just need to pick their brain for a second, because I don't understand. Now, HeartGold and SoulSilver do rectify this problem, but only just slightly. Jasmine's final Pokemon is still higher level than Price's, but is only by 1 level, and her second Pokemon is weaker than his second Pokemon by 2 levels. And the remakes did at least overhaul the Kanto leaders' team's levels, raising them to better match what the player's level should be at this point in the game, even though Janine still gets shafted with the lowest level Pokemon out of the bunch. Now, even with the wonky levels of HeartGold and SoulSilver, they were still well received and are leaps and bounds better than their original games. We again got a graphical overhaul for the games, and can I just say that I think Gen 4 has the best 2D sprite art for the series. HeartGold and SoulSilver also introduced everyone's favorite feature to the games, Pokemon following you. When these games came out, everyone was instantly in love with the feature, and has forever been one that fans love when it's implemented well. The games also were of course updated to have the physical special split attacking system, which, if you didn't know, from Gens 1 to 3, whether an attack was physical or special was determined purely on its type. So for example, all water moves would be special and all fighting moves would be physical regardless of what the move actually was. With Gen 4 this changed, and whether a move was special or physical was determined by what the move actually did and how it interacted with the Pokemon, allowing for a much more complex battle system. However, besides that, not much else was updated in terms of game mechanics between Gold and Silver and HeartGold and SoulSilver. You had the Pokeathlon, which was just an Olympic-style minigames to play using your Pokemon. These are actually really fun, and I had a blast playing these, but these don't really count towards mechanical changes between generations. They're kind of just little side things that they add into every remake. And then of course you had a few special events like the Cinder Ruins and the Ilex Forest Celebi event. Now next up on the docket are Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, the Generation 6 remakes for Ruby and Sapphire. These, to this day, are considered the best Pokemon remakes to be released. And I'm going to be honest with my biases once again here. I've never actually cared for Ruby and Sapphire or Emerald. I was just never really a big Gen 3 fan. I tried playing them, I don't know. There's something about those games I just could never get into. So these remakes were never really as enjoyable to me. Nevertheless, following suit with previous remakes, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire was the first games we got that took a 2D game and made it into a 3D game to of course align with Pokemon's new art style going forward. And I will admit that they did a fantastic job of translating the 2D world of Ruby and Sapphire to 3D. As for mechanical changes between the original games and the remakes, we of course had the physical special split, we have Mega Evolutions, the addition of the Fairy type, a slightly altered main plotline, and a completely new post-game plotline including Rayquaza and Deoxys. Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire also set the precedent for giving old legendary Pokemon new forms and signature abilities and moves with Mega Rayquaza and Primal Groudon and Kyogre. However, despite Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire being the best received remakes of the franchise, it also begins to display one of the downfalls of the Pokemon remake formula, which is simply that as time goes on, the remakes are going to contain less and less mechanical enhancements from their predecessors, and that kind of just makes sense if you think about it. With every new generation of Pokemon, the underlying gameplay mechanics of the series changes from the previous generation. So in order to make their older games more accessible to the current generation's audiences, GameFreak makes a remake to revitalize the original games. But as the series progresses, the changes between each generation's mechanics are going to dwindle, thus giving them less incentive to create a remake. For example, between Generation 6 and Generation 7, there was virtually no change to the series mechanics. We of course got a new gimmick of Z moves, but I won't be counting gimmicks as a change in mechanics since most of the time gimmicks do not get carried over to future games, with the exception of Mega Evolution. Now, I don't think not having enough mechanical changes to implement into a remake is the main reason Pokemon remakes are dead, but it is one of the three main reasons I believe they are. So let's continue our journey through the remakes. The year was 2016, and Pokemon was cooking. They were cooking something that had changed the face of Pokemon for years to come. Pokemon Go. With Pokemon Go's massive success, it brought in a metric ton of new fans for the series, as well as revitalized a lot of old fans who probably hadn't played a mainline Pokemon game since generations 1 to 3. So the most logical thing for GameFreak to do was capitalize on this Pokemon renaissance by remaking a game in a region everyone would be familiar with, while also incorporating features from the game that ignited or reignited fans' interest. And thus, Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee were born. Now obviously these games were mainly a marketing strategy as they were released 2 years after the booming launch of Pokemon Go, but for all intents and purposes, the Let's Go games do serve as pseudo remakes for the Pokemon's Red, Blue, Green, and Yellow. Personally, I consider these retellings as the story and characters vastly differ from both the original Kanto games and the remakes. With Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, the Kanto region got the largest overhaul we may have ever seen in the series. Of course, we got the leap into 3D for the Kanto games, we got the addition of the Fairy type, Mega Evolutions, following Pokemon, Ride Pokemon, Overworld Wild Pokemon, a completely new main plot and characters. Needless to say, Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee brought Kanto into the modern standard for Pokemon games, and I think they may be tied with Orez for the best remakes in a lot of people's opinions. Now these games did remove a few staple features from the mainline Pokemon games, such as the ability to battle wild Pokemon. In the Let's Go games, you catch Pokemon exactly as you would in Pokemon Go. There is no battling that takes place, you simply toss a Pokeball at a Pokemon until it either captures the Pokemon or it flees. There are still trainer battles, but there are no EVs, and instead I believe you use candies to power up the Pokemon's stats. And you of course get these candies by catching a surplus of Pokemon and transferring them over to the professor. So as you can obviously see, a lot of Pokemon Go mechanics were meshed into the mainline series with these games. Yet all in all, Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee are still regarded in high praise by many fans. They have a beautiful art style, some of the best for the 3D games I think, and do seem like an enjoyable way to play through the Kanto region. I just never decided to pick them up because of the watered down game mechanics. I personally really enjoy Pokemon for all of those underlying mechanics like IVs and EVs and intense battles and all of that stuff, so Pokemon Let's Go, Pikachu and Eevee just didn't really ever appeal to me.
That's the end of the line.
Alright folks, we have finally made it. Regarded as the worst Pokemon remakes, you knew it was coming, I knew it was coming. Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, otherwise known as BDSP, the last remakes of the franchise. BDSP saw controversy from its very trailer due to its chibi art style. Up until this point, every remake has greatly improved the graphics of the game they're remaking, with the last two remakes being completely redone in the current generation's art style. Now this isn't to say that BDSP didn't improve the graphics of the original games, because they definitely do, but people were expecting a lot more, especially since the Gen 4 games are many people's favorites and are among some of the best-selling games of the entire series. Another major point of contention for these games was the one-to-one faithful remake aspect. Every other remake in the series has gotten some type of tweak to their plot lines or characters that has breathed some new life into the remakes. However, BDSP follows the plots of Diamond and Pearl beat for beat without change, which is a major mistake because players enjoy Pokemon remakes with that feeling of playing something familiar but also brand new. However, controversies aside, how much mechanical updates did Diamond and Pearl receive for their remakes? Well, they obviously got the fairy type added into the game, and that's about it, to be honest. We didn't get this generation's gimmick of Dynamaxing because, again, faithful one-to-one remakes. We didn't get any new forms, though we do get new forms in Legends Arceus, but that's a whole different ballgame. Gym Leader's teams didn't get tweaked, so we still have things like Volkner, the electric type gym leader with only 2 electric type Pokemon on his team, and Flint, the fire type Elite Four with 2 of his 5 Pokemon being fire type. Now, I didn't make this video to dump on BDSP, though I do have a video doing just that, so check it out after this if you're interested. So let's take a look at some of the new and updated features BDSP did well. The Underground did get a whole new facelift, now being called the Grand Underground, where you can catch Pokemon that were not native to the original games before beating the Elite Four. The Grand Underground was honestly a lot of fun, and I spent a ton of time down there, but I will say that they completely watered down the hidden bases aspect of it, which is a shame because that was one of my favorite features of the Underground in the original Gen 4 games. Another returning feature I've always loved are ball capsules and stickers. This one they nailed right out of the park. The sticker effects look great, and you can make some really dope looking effects for your Pokemon. And then finally, the last thing they did really well was the Elite Four. BDSP has a competitively trained Elite Four, with I believe the first 4 members having 1 stat trained to 252 EVs on each Pokemon, and all Pokemon with held items. And then Cynthia, I believe, is a fully EV trained team with items. Now on a normal playthrough, this makes the Elite Four a pretty decent challenge, but on a Nuzlocke or a challenge run, they're actually a legitimate threat. And I do have a video of that as well on the channel, so check that out afterwards if you want. But other than all that, BDSP didn't really enhance the Gen 4 games all that much. You of course got some modern quality of life improvements like accessing your Pokemon boxes from the in-game menu, but all in all, playing BDSP is almost identical to the original games. And that brings me back to my earlier point of each remake having less and less to modernize as the series progresses. Generations 1 to 3 were the foundation of the series, where it was still building and improving its mechanics. Then Gen 4 to 6 refined the series mechanics, and then finally from Generation 7 onward, they've mainly just been modernizing the games with quality of life improvements and of course battle gimmicks. So it only stands to reason that unless they do complete overhauls, each new remake is going to feel less enhanced than their original version. For example, if they remade Sun and Moon, there isn't much they could enhance mechanically. They could have Pokemon boxes being accessible anywhere, add the changes made to breeding and passing along egg moves by using a Mirror Herb, which I guarantee a lot of players don't even utilize or know about, and they could add TM crafting. But those things don't make a remake of Sun and Moon feel necessary. In order to do that, you would need to drastically revamp the games in a meaningful way. They would need to add new plot points, change the layout or geography of the region, and or have some type of alteration to certain characters, like how they altered Archie and Shelly's appearance in Oraz and gave them more screen time in the game's plot. And let's be honest, we all know modern Game Freak isn't going to take the time to do a substantial retelling of their old games while simultaneously working on their next new Pokemon game. Which brings me to the second and what I think is actually the main reason Pokemon remakes are dead. As we make our way up the generations, each new remake is going to become a larger and harder project for the company to remake. Take Gen 5 games for example. Remaking Castelia City would probably be a larger task than remaking Mesagoza. Castelia is supposed to be a huge, bustling metropolis, and in Black and White 2, it really does feel like that with how many streets and buildings and areas it has. But a full 3D render of that is probably something GameFreak isn't willing to put resources towards when they are also very likely working on Generation 10 games at the same time. And as they start to get into remakes of their fully 3D games, the workload of taking an already 3D game and remaking it in a new engine on a new system to look and play even better than the original game will become an arduous task for GameFreak. Like, can you imagine GameFreak trying to remake Sword and Shield or Scarlet and Violet? Even if those remakes would be like 8 or 10 years away, I just don't think GameFreak would be up to the task of remaking these games with a higher fidelity of graphics and an enhanced plotline. And so, with the modern remakes becoming more and more difficult terrain for GameFreak, in comes their saving grace. The Pokemon Legends series, a way for GameFreak to do retellings or demakes, as they've said with Legends Arceus, without having to remake an entire region and plot that is both accurate to the original games, but also different enough to feel fresh and new. With the Legends series, GameFreak has complete liberty to make the game whatever they want without fans complaining about features being removed or changed for the worse, or without having to worry about people being mad the art style isn't a drastic improvement from the original. Now, this is the Pokemon community here, so we'll still get disgruntled fans regardless, but at least with Legends games, GameFreak will get cut a little more slack. In my opinion, the reason we're getting a Pokemon Legends game set solely in Lumio City is because GameFreak knows they can't do a remake set in the entirety of Kalos Justice while also having a modern rendition of Lumio City in the game. But they also can't just do an X and Y remake and have it only take place in a single city because the fans might literally riot. So the compromise is Pokemon Legends ZA. This way GameFreak now doesn't need to do a remake of X and Y because they have ZA as their Generation 6 pseudo remake. And I think going forward, the Legends series will be our new remakes as it is the least taxing on the developers while also being the most profitable. Which happens to be my final point on why I think remakes are dead. Remakes are statistically less profitable than original game releases, and that includes Pokemon Legends Arceus. Taking a look at the trusty old chart of Pokemon game sales that always pops up every few years, the only remake games that sold better than Legends Arceus is Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, but keep in mind, those were released with the marketing and hype boost from Pokemon Go, and as with all Pokemon games, those are sales numbers from both versions combined. So essentially, Legends Arceus, a single version game, sold almost as well as GameFreak's best-selling remake, and sold better than the remake released in tandem with it. I think this showed GameFreak and maybe even Nintendo and or the Pokemon Company that traditional remakes are not the best business practice going forward. In fact, my low-stakes conspiracy theory is that Legends Arceus and BDSP were litmus tests to decide how the franchise would handle remakes going forward, and with Legends Arceus being a critical success among fans, that may have been the final nail in the Pokemon remakes coffin. But what do you think? Are Pokemon remakes officially dead, or is GameFreak just taking a little break from them to kind of figure out their head and get things back in order? Are you expecting a remake for Sun and Moon or a Legends game or maybe something else? Let me know down below because I love conversations about this kind of stuff. And if you enjoyed the video, drop a like. If you hated it, drop a dislike. Consider subscribing if you really liked it and want to see more. And thank you for watching. I'll catch you next time.